Welcome to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy you could join us today. We are welcoming back to the program David Rand. He is a Young Voices contributor. And David, I suspect you probably wear a couple hats besides that. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, when I'm not writing for Young Voices, I am working as a political consultant, do some elections and policy work here up in the great state of Montana. And I currently run a podcast with some friends of mine called Human Reaction, where we do a weekly show and some monologues and assess the news, analysis, and culture and all that kind of stuff.
Well, based on what I've read of your writing, I bet you guys cover a lot of interesting territory. And I'm looking specifically at an article that you have published on AmericanThinker.com, and it's about banning TikTok. I've heard so much talk about this. First of all, let's talk about who wants to ban TikTok, and then let's talk about some of the reasons given why they want to ban it.
Well, there's a kind of a coalition of some mostly center-right folks who want to ban TikTok, although there's some establishment Democrats, especially in the Senate, who are on favor of this too. There is a pretty good association that you can easily predict it. If they're very close to the intelligence and foreign policy establishment, they are very much more passionate about it. And there's other folks too who are just more socially conservative, who are worried about the impacts TikTok's having on children. That's really the coalition that we see. The classic bootleggers and Baptists. Lastly, the people who are heavily lobbied by Facebook, they want to ban TikTok because it's one of their competitors.
I could say, okay, now I could understand that. Now, I understand one of the big objections to TikTok is, well, the Chinese are the ones behind it and they're using it to gather intelligence. And be that as it may, are there some ulterior motives perhaps at work here? Because I know, for the children, that's a pretty good intention, but it's also been used to mask some kind of shady motives from time to time too.
That's right. It's always safe to be skeptical when government says they're doing it to save the children. Now, in my case, in my new article, what I feature is what Mike Benz and journalist Michael Schellenberger called the censorship industrial complex, what they describe as this constellation of government and nonprofit and for-profit entities that are working together to kind of control the narrative online. And one of the things that I think has been underspoken about is the degree which they are the true force behind a lot of this, because they are the biggest cui bono to the whole thing. And especially it relates to when you look at the comments by various different important people in talking about it, like Marsha Blackburn and Marco Rubio, who both said one of the major reasons they want to do this is because TikTok just isn't censoring the way they think they should be censoring, which is that in this case, pro-Palestinian talk is just popular there. And it's more so popular there than comparative stuff. There's been some analysis of this. And largely the analysis just looks like it just trends more on TikTok. And so the question is that happening because, as these senators have conspiracy theorized without any evidence or given anything to the public, that they are doing this to undermine American support of Israel? Not that they're doing it because young people in generally are more sympathetic to the Palestinian issue from their perspective. And maybe they're wrong about that. That's fine. But the question is whether or not they should be allowed to speak to other Americans about it and whether or not the government should get involved with that.
Well,
go ahead.
You mentioned the censorship industrial complex, and I believe Michael Schellenberger was one of the ones who was helping to break the news and get the news out there about the Twitter files. We have a real serious move to control what the American public sees and hears, and this just sounds like another approach to try to make that happen through one of the, shall we say, less protected social media platforms.
Right. Well, and at least less controlled by the people who are concerned about control, right? If, for the most part, Twitter and Facebook and their major competitors are American companies, while TikTok is not really a Chinese company. It's a international company, of which a lot of the holders of TikTok as shareholders are Americans. So but it's not obviously as compliant with that control. And it's really seen in the testimony from the CEO of TikTok from a few months ago, where he said, look, we're trying to build a system that's going to be resistant to any censorship of any kind, whether it's the Chinese government or the American government. And keeping in mind that the Chinese government itself doesn't even allow TikTok in its territory, probably because it doesn't censor enough there, while they offer another product to there that is compliant with their government's rules and regulations. So I honestly think they're just not playing the game, and that's why they're going after it. And I think if you look at Mike Benz, who's a former cybersecurity specialist at the State Department, he's made the point that this whole thing really is about control And I can't really recommend his work enough because it really kind of looks behind the picture of a lot of this intelligence black hat work that is probably really at the forefront of why this is being pushed right now.
Okay, David,
Because that's what we have.
let me play devil's advocate here for a moment, and I'm trying to get into the headspace of those who are trying to make the case for why we need more censorship. Are we trying to hear? Are we trying to say that there is information out there that is so dangerous that the public, under no circumstances, should ever be allowed to consider it?
Exactly. And part of that information is just knowing the anti-Israel side to the Israel-Palestine, issue.
Wow.
And that to me is just not an acceptable standard for Americans, right? And especially when it's not as if we're not debating whether or not we should ban Hamas from TikTok. We're debating about whether we want to ban TikTok from Americans. It's a completely different discussion.
Well, an old mentor of mine, and he was probably the first real libertarian that I ever met. This guy was in his 70s, and frankly, he'd thought about this kind of stuff for a while. And he says, look, I don't know how to make it any more simple than this. He says, either you choose what you will read, what you will hear, what you will see, or someone else does. Period. And I went, oh, when you put it in those terms, yeah, I don't want to come down on censorship side for the sake of safety. I would rather there be bad or even misleading information out there, but also know that I have unfettered access to good information with which to counter it.
Right. And this is even more insidious than that when you look at the actions of the CIC. Now, for example, at least in the USSR, you would know that there's censorship going on. But as you look at the CIC's actions, when the Seymour Hersh broke the story on the Nord Stream pipeline, if you posted that story onto Facebook, when you click on it, it wouldn't take you to Seymour's Substack. It took you to the Norwegian government's take on it. It very specifically rerouted links from where you as a user were trying to send people to where it thought you should send people. So that's and then in that case, like is that censorship? It's a kind of one, especially if it was the FBI telling the Atlantic Council to put pressure on Facebook to do it. At the very top of that pyramid is the CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the FBI, and various different government agencies who are acting with taxpayer dollars to get these things to happen.
Wow. No, I think I would agree with your use of the word insidious. It's censorship, but it's censorship by misdirection. And the bottom line is someone is intervening between you and whatever information you're seeking because they know what's best.
And in this case, they're saying, why isn't TikTok demoting or deprioritizing criticism of Israel like the other platforms will? And if that's the motivation, then you have to ask yourself, what is the goal of the people who want to censor TikTok? Is it really Chinese, or are they just using that as a distraction so that they can create for themselves a mono narrative, which is what we talk about all the time on my podcast, the mono narrative of control that we have to all have the same opinion on this foreign policy question of American support of Israel.
It's so interesting. I mean, we live in a time where there has never been more information readily available to us than right now, and yet at the same time, I don't think I've ever seen a stronger effort in my life to try to control and to steer that information, in the direction that, certain people in the ruling class want it to go.
Well, exactly. And this is kind of the story that we're picking up at the end of it. And if you listen to Mike Benn's reporting on this, which seems pretty solid, because if you look at how CISA, which we have FOIA requests informations about that's that first agency I mentioned, how they evolved first as we're going to defend us from being invaded by North Korea with digitally. And then before you know it, they're working to make sure that the Arab Spring goes the right way. And then before you know it, they're working to make sure Brexit doesn't succeed. And then Donald Trump can't be elected. So then by 2020, you have CISA working with the Aspen Institute to say, hey, if a laptop story drops about the president's son, this is how we're going to react to it. They're doing that in September and August of the year before it actually dropped. So what is going on here? We still have a lot of questions. And of course, there's House investigations on this sort of thing that we don't know a lot. But what we can know is that this is definitely something that we should be latching onto and concerned about, more so than Chinese influence over the youth.
Okay, now we've got about a minute here, but I don't want to go too far into conspiracy territory. But is it safe to say, and can I truthfully, opine that U.S. intelligence agencies actually have a fair amount of influence over what is reported and what isn't reported in America?
Well, they definitely did in the past. If you look at the Church Committee, especially Project Mockingbird, we know that they've had that influence in the past. And we know that after the passage of the Patriot Act and the War on Terror era, that there's been a bigger influence to do so. So by the giving information we have, there's no doubt they see from NATO downward an effort to control the narrative as key to the defense of America, and that's why they're doing it.
And
They
I
need to censor us for that reason, to defend us.
I understand that there are people who say, well, they may have done it in the past, but they sure wouldn't do it now. And it seems like, I don't know. The stakes seem a little bit higher now. In fact, if anything, since COVID, it seems like they've been more desperate than ever. Again, we're talking with David Rand. David is a contributor for Young Voices. And where is the best place for people to find you on social media as well as to follow your writings?
Yeah, you can find us at humanreactionpod.org, or you can find me at david-rand.net.
Okay. And of course, you're featured on AmericanThinker.com, which that's one of my go-to websites on a daily basis. David, great to visit with you.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Very happy to welcome a familiar voice back to the program. That would be Benjamin Ayanian. Ben, how are you? It's been a while since we talked.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here. How have you been?
Just waiting for spring to come, and I think it's finally here.
Yeah, no, we're all happy about that.
After a couple false starts. So for people meeting you for the first time, take just a second, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm a contributor here at Young Voices. I've been a contributor since I want to say 2022, and it's been a great experience. I write about politics, economics, social issues, whatever you can think of, anything under the sun. I have an opinion about it, and I like to put it out there. I'm also getting ready to go to law school here in the fall, which is pretty exciting. So, and one more thing I want to shout out real quick is within the next week and a half, I'll have a self-published book up on Amazon.
Go ahead and tell us the name of it.
It's titled Beyond Intention: How Progressive Economic Policies Harm the Most Vulnerable.
Okay, I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that. We're going to talk today about spending, and in particular, it looks like another government, I'm going to put this in air quotes, shutdown, was averted when Congress approved another spending package. What was it, $1.2 trillion? I remember when billion carried some weight, but now we're talking trillions. Talk to me about the bad, the ugly, and the worst of this spending package.
Yeah, a lot of times we hear people talk about, the good, the bad, and the ugly of a bill. I went with the bad, the ugly, and the worst because there's a lot of bad to talk about. So as you stated, it was a $1.2 trillion spending package. It helped avert, a partial government shutdown. Following the passage of that bill, media were talking about how it was long overdue that this was passed. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that, they could characterize passing the bill as completing their job. And everyone went back to their bases and pointed out the couple of things in the spending package that represent quote unquote victories, for their base. Unfortunately, the American citizenry as a whole does not come out as a winner for a handful of reasons. First, the contents of the bill are nothing to be excited about. For one, 1.2 trillion is far too much. We are running up a deficit at, our deficit at record rates. The debt is growing continuously. Interest on that debt is incredibly high right now, especially, with inflation. We had to raise interest rates pretty significantly. So the cost to service our debt is really high. So we definitely cannot be spending trillions of dollars lightly. Yes, with a T, not a B. That's not what we're fussing over anymore. So, a way to really parse out whether or not we should support a huge spending package or we should, want our politicians to spend on specific issues one by one in their own packages is just to look at what are called earmarks in a lot of these bills. And so, individuals can basically apply for earmarks, which directs federal funding towards various pet projects in their districts. And all of our spending now is littered with ridiculous earmarks. To name a couple, from Democrats, there's $850,000 going to a New Jersey housing development specifically for LGBTQ plus seniors. There's $400,000 going to an organization that provides various gender affirming services for trans youth. And when I wrote about this, I didn't even take a stance on the social issues that are involved there. The point is that the federal government should not be stealing taxpayer dollars to fund these sorts of initiatives. If people want to donate money on their own volition to certain causes, businesses, developments, they're totally free to do that, but the government should not coercively force individuals to contribute to it. And Republicans do this all the time as well. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she, received or was able to obtain, 3.5, I believe it was million or 3.8 million in federal funding for an airport expansion in Dade County, Georgia, which sure, that's great, I guess, for Georgians, but why is federal money being spent on pet projects in localities? So I guess so I don't ramble on too long, I'll stop there, but the contents are definitely something that needs to be discussed.
Well, and the question that underlies each one of those is that a proper function of what the federal government is supposed to be doing? I don't think anybody in Congress, save maybe one or two individuals, Thomas Massey, maybe Senator Paul, are asking that kind of question. Everybody else just doesn't seem to care. Let's just get the money out there.
Exactly. And Republicans talk a big game about wanting to reel in spending. And when they have control, they do the same, sorts of things. And obviously they have control in the House, but this was a bipartisan spending package. But the GOP had other ways that they could have reined in spending. They didn't stop the $200 million that are going to be allocated for a new FBI headquarters in Maryland, giving them a much more comfortable place to spy on and harass American citizens. And also the GOP strongly supported a $27 billion raise for the Department of Defense above its current funding level, even though the DoD, the Pentagon specifically, can't pass an audit. 6 years in a row, they've failed their audit, and the Republicans are still supporting these, massive spending numbers for the Department of Defense. So, the contents of the bill are incredibly concerning, but that was what I labeled as the bad. The ugly was the process. So our nation's politicians, passed a package with terrible contents in it. Worse than that, they didn't even read it. They were provided with the text of this bill 36 hours, around 36 hours prior to having to vote on it in the House. The package was over 1,000 pages long.
Wow.
So I doubt our politicians are staying up, 36 hours straight trying to parse through the nitty-gritty details. So basically, they didn't read it.
Well, it's just money. I just taxpayer. Oh, never mind. I won't even try to be sarcastic on it. So they pass it in a record time. They don't have time to really thoroughly go through it. I'm sure that everything in there was on the up and up. What's the worst, though? What's the worst part of this spending package?
So the worst to me, it's a competition between all these different parts, but the worst to me was the broken promises involved in the process. When Republicans, put Mike Johnson in the speaker position in the House, there was a lot of hope that things were going to change. There would be a lot more votes on, single issue, spending. There would be amendments proposed and vigorous debate, and individuals would be able to have at least 72 hours to read the bills that they were going to be voting on. But Johnson, oddly enough, he waived the 72-hour rule for this $1.2 trillion package. And there were Republicans, from all different, parts of the spectrum within the Republican Party who were opposed to him doing so. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she has put forward a motion actually to vacate the speaker chair and hopefully replace Johnson. And Justin Amash, who is not a MAGA Republican, as they call it, like Marjorie Taylor Greene is. Justin Amash is more of a libertarian. He actually was part of the Libertarian Party at one point. He's running for Senate as a Republican in Michigan, but Justin Amash supported, her move to oust, Speaker Johnson, and now Thomas Massey as well has come out and said he would support that. Support the same action. And so to me, the worst was the broken promises.
And it has to be said, Speaker Johnson right now is apparently trying to bring something to a vote this week for more aid in terms of billions to Ukraine, which is another topic for another time. Wow.
It never ends.
Well, I love how you conclude your article about blindly spending taxpayer dollars. That's not governing. It's lazy. It's immoral. We should demand better. It's an election year. Any thoughts that maybe we'll have some corrective action taken at the voting booth?
Yeah, we can only hope that in Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives will see some beneficial election outcomes. Fingers crossed that that's the case. In terms of who is president, I don't think really it makes a difference whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. We're going to see irresponsible spending being supported.
Again, we are talking with Ben Ayanian. He is a Young Voices contributor. Ben, where can people find you?
You guys can find me on Twitter at Benjamin Ayanian.
Very good. Hey, I look forward to the next time we talk.
Yeah, me as well. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Very happy to welcome Jacob Lane back to the program. Jacob, for those who are meeting you for the first time, obviously you are a Young Voices contributor, but tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I am an independent consultant and political consultant as well. So that means that I consult with nonprofits across the country. I help them with their communications and their fundraising efforts. And then I do the same thing with politicians, particularly those located in the Midwestern states of Indiana and Illinois.
So I'm looking at an article that you wrote for thecentersquare.com about Illinois making history, but not necessarily in a good way as it pertains to education. What's the story there?
Yes, it's very unfortunate. So for the first time in our nation's history, a state is actually rolling back educational freedom. So for years, Illinois had the Invest in Kids Act. And what that was a tax credit scholarship program. So let's say you're an Illinois resident and you want to contribute $10,000 to the program. You would get $7,500 back in your taxes, and that money could be used for students, most of them from low income neighborhoods, to attend private institutions. So like I said, many of these kids came from failing schools. So this gave them a chance to attend a school that they otherwise would not have been able to attend. Unfortunately, the program was put into place by former Governor Rauner, who happened to be a Republican. We don't get many of those these days in Illinois as governor. The program was up for an extension. And unfortunately, legislators, instead of even voting on the act, they just simply ignored it. So the program will unfortunately come to an end at the end of this academic year.
And so where does that leave those who were participating in the program? What options do they have now as far as their kids' education?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, it leaves many of them in limbo. So there were over 10,000 students who were enrolled in the program. Some of these students received full tuition assistance. Some of them received partial tuition assistance. But the bottom line is that 10,000 kids now are left out in the cold. So most of these kids don't really know what they're going to be doing in the next academic year. Some of them will unfortunately have to go back to the failing schools in their communities that they escaped from. Some of them hopefully will be able to find a way to continue attending these schools, hopefully through private donations or possibly scholarship assistance from a diocese. But for many families and for most of these students, they are literally in a state of limbo right now, praying that the Illinois legislature renews this, but it doesn't look too good so far.
So tell me about the opposition to that program. I'm guessing the teachers' unions probably took a dim view of it.
Yeah, so unfortunately in Illinois, the Illinois Education Association and the Illinois Federation of Teachers are two of the strongest unions, not just in Illinois, but in the country. And as most people listening to this probably realize, Illinois is not a right-to-work state, which means that our unions are much stronger than other unions in surrounding states. Both of those unions put an ad blitz against the Invest in Kids Act. When it was coming up for renewal, they went all out, spending millions of dollars of union dues against this. And unfortunately, a lot of what they were spreading was lies. And there's another unfortunate part to this too, in that in Illinois, not only do the Democrats in the legislature get a lot of funds from these various unions, but unfortunately, they've also reached a number of Republicans, the very people we're relying on to bring this legislation forward and to lead this push. Most of the leadership in the Republican Party, in both the state House and the state Senate, have received union contributions.
So it's in their interest to, please the ones making those donations.
Exactly, Brian. And the unfortunate thing is the Illinois Policy Institute actually put out a poll about this. They polled Republicans, independents, and Democrats about the future of the program. And 63% of people wanted to see the program continue. And again, that's independents, that's Democrats, that's Republicans, that's everyone. But unfortunately, for the kids in this program, they don't vote. What votes and what talks is special interests and political donations. And the easiest way to kill something that's popular with voters, but not popular with your special interest group, is silence. Just don't bring it up for a vote. And that's exactly what Speaker Welch did when he killed the program.
Well, and it seems, I'm just going to say it seems rather cowardly in that this allows those politicians to basically sidestep any accountability because they just kind of let it go away instead of showing this is my position on it. Here it is for the record.
Well, exactly. And the level of hypocrisy exhibited by some of these people, it's unbelievable, because during election season, these are the people that always want to be out there championing public education. They use it as a rallying cry to get political donations. But when it comes to their own children's education, if you look at a lot of these folks in leadership, they send their kids to private schools. So obviously they have a problem with the schools in their locality where they're from. Why can't they extend that same courtesy to those that probably come from lower income neighborhoods? Give them the chance of success, give them the chance at opportunity. But unfortunately, in Illinois politics, as I write in the piece, doing the right thing is the hardest thing of all.
Well, I understand that from the standpoint of doing the right thing often comes with a price, but to find a politician who's willing to pay that price, that's a hard thing to find.
And unfortunately, too, Brian, like I said, most states you have what I would call a viable opposition. So yes, Democrats are in the majority in Illinois, but unfortunately, they're in the supermajority. So Republicans, to be quite frank, they don't even have to show up to vote on days, and the Democrats can still conduct business without them. So the problem really is that there's not an effective opposition. So they don't feel the need really to even bring this up for a vote, because there really is no opposition. And it doesn't help things when the House Minority Leader, Toni McComey, she received $120,000 in the 2022 election from teachers unions. Now, $120,000 compared to some folks on the other side, that's chunk change, but still, it signals to folks, especially in her district. I mean, keep in mind, most of these folks on the R side that have received this money, they're from districts that President Trump carried in both 2016 and in 2020, and that a Republican candidate carries when they run for governor in 2018 and in 2014. And these people are voting against their constituents. Essentially, they're voting for the teachers unions that, quite frankly, had Illinois by a stranglehold and enforced some of the most draconian lockdowns seen during the COVID pandemic.
Wow. So the program will officially end, May? At the end of May?
So, yes, it will end at the end of this academic year. Now, this is when we get into a little bit of a mess, because there are still funds left with the program. So it is up to the legislator to decide what to do with those funds, because people have generously contributed to this. Now, what happens to those funds? Now, I do want to say there is it's a very small glimmer of hope, and it's fading by day, but there has been a bill filed by a Republican member in the House to extend the program for 10 years into 2035. Unfortunately, it is stuck in the Rules Committee, and if you follow Illinois politics, that's where they send bills to die. It has not been given a hearing date. And to make matters even more unfortunate, the lead sponsor of that bill just resigned from the House a couple weeks ago. So the future does not look bright. I'm an optimistic kind of guy, but you got to call it when you see it.
Okay, now, of course, with every challenge comes opportunity. Are there any groups that you are seeing, perhaps, that have been up and coming on the side of school choice or educational freedom that may step up to this challenge in the days ahead? I mean, it sounds like a simple solution probably isn't going to happen, but I could see dedicated people saying, I'll climb that mountain and getting to work. Are you tracking any groups that are like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Moms for Liberty has been a great group in the state. They've been wonderful in promoting the legislation. You've got a number of individual dioceses across the country, because the Catholic dioceses within the state have been the primary beneficiaries of this legislation. So they're promoting this. And look, it's to their interest too. Already, 4 schools have announced that they'll be closing at the end of the academic year because they're not going to be receiving the funds that this legislation provided. So, I hate to say it, there'll probably even be more before the end of the year. But yes, there are a number of grassroots organizations that are moving towards this. The thing is that what proponents have to do is that if they want this to get through, there has to be a change in the legislature. So this election is really critical. You're going to have to vote some folks out that have been just obstructionists towards this legislation.
Have those folks made themselves clear? I mean, are their positions clear, or have they been the ones kind of sitting back and, well, I'm not really doing anything. My hands are clean.
I'll give credit. Some of them have been very vocal, but some of them have been very silent. So you really have to do your homework when you're voting in 2024. But yeah.
Okay. Again, we are talking with Jacob Lane. Jacob is a Young Voices contributor as well as a consultant in Illinois. And Jacob, for people who want to follow you, either on social media or follow your writing, where's the best place we can find you?
Sure. So the best place you can find me is I'm a regular contributor to newsmax.com, and my column is For Our Kids. I talk a lot about education reform and education matters across the country.
Very good. Hey, I enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Hey, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And I hope you get to do some more work in Illinois. So
As
Lord
do I.
knows we need all the help we can get. So.
Welcome back. This is our 4th and final segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices today. Happy to welcome a new Young Voices contributor. Garrit Blizzard is joining us. Garrit, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Fantastic. So since this is our first time meeting you, take just a moment here to tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Certainly. So I'm a contributor for Young Voices. I'm also the editor-in-chief for the Texas Horn, which is UT Austin's conservative student publication. I'm a senior here studying government and journalism.
Very good. And by the way, I really enjoyed an article of yours that I read about what Trump should look for in a running mate. And, the first thing I want to start with is I have to ask you, it pretty much looks like Trump is going to be the nominee. Is there any foreseeable, or do you see any possibility that it wouldn't be him?
Yeah, no, all signs point to Trump being the nominee.
So the big question now, I know there's lots of speculation. Well, who will he choose for his running mate? And there's a lot of people making recommendations, but I love how you're just pointing out these are some of the things he should be looking for in a running mate. Where do we begin as far as the qualities of what he needs in terms of his vice presidential nominee?
Yeah, certainly. So my argument can be broken down into 2 points. 1, Trump needs to pick someone who is young, or at least younger than he is. And 2, Trump needs to pick someone who doesn't want the job and isn't going to run for president once Trump is out of office in 2028, presuming he is elected this cycle. And this really comes down to polling. Polls have shown that a majority of Americans are really concerned about the age of both Trump and Biden. It's worse so for Biden, but people are still concerned about Trump's age. And also the fact that many Americans are just not really happy with the 2 options we have this cycle. And so in my mind, I was thinking that the history has shown that the vice president usually, for the most part, makes a try at the presidency. And so in my mind, I'm thinking that we need a clear field in 2028. We need new dynamic leadership. And I'm thinking that Trump should pick someone who isn't going to be waiting around for 4 years, just waiting for their turn.
Let's explore that a little bit, because I agree with you that That's what we need, because we have enough career politicians standing there waiting for my turn, to step up and run for president. But are there any names out there that strike you as reluctant, maybe draftable kind of running mates?
Well, Trump has, of course, given hints as to who he's considering. He's already said that he knows who he's going to ask or going to pick. But the three names I mentioned in my article are Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, and Dr. Ben Carson, the former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Now, for Tim Scott and Kristi Noem, they both, I think, really do handle the age question very well. They're both in their 50s, considerably younger than Trump. But I do question the second criteria about whether they would, forgo running for president in 2028 if they are vice president. Tim Scott, of course, ran in this time around, and Kristi Noem was talked about as a potential contender for the presidency, and she came out and said that why run when you don't have the chance, and that just kind of signals to me that she clearly is interested in being president. I don't think that's what we need. I don't really think that they are the best options. And then there's Dr. Ben Carson, who was he was in Trump's administration, one of the longer serving members of his administration, didn't leave him after January 6th, and of course Trump has said that loyalty is another thing he's considering for his vice presidential, for his running mate. And Ben Carson doesn't really answer the age question well, but I think that he's soft-spoken, which I think complements Trump's personality. And also, I think that he's kind of towards the end of his career. I don't really see why he would run for the presidency, even though he did do that in 2016. So I think he's a good option for the second criteria, but not the first. And of course, there are other names. Elise Stefanik, Congresswoman from New York, has been mentioned. Rising star, loyal defender of Trump. Again, I don't really see her foregoing becoming president, especially if she has the opportunity to become the first female president. And then another name has been mentioned has been Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who's an interesting choice, especially given his and Trump's relationship back in 2016. Also, the constitutional questions of since both Trump and Rubio live in Florida, they both can't, Trump's going to have to change his residency. So those are some names, but out of the top of my head, no one really actually comes to mind as someone who really fits the criteria that I've laid out.
Now, as you're looking ahead to 2028, are there any names that come to mind that would be a potential, good fit for a presidential run then? And of course, I'm excluding those potential running mates for this year.
Yeah, so the name that comes to mind first is Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. He is pretty young, politically speaking, and he's proven to be able to win in a bluish state, Virginia. And I think that he would be able to really, unite many of the different parts of the Republican Party in a general election. Granted, that's in 2028, so that's a few years from now. So we'll have to wait and see, who else, enters the field, enters the political landscape. But Governor Youngkin's the first one that comes to mind.
Okay. Now I want to kind of flip it over to the Democrat side and just ask you, Garrett, do you believe that Joe Biden is going to still be the nominee for the Democratic Party come November?
I do. I mean, anything can happen, but I think that Democrats are really, a majority of them are not happy with him being the nominee. As I mentioned earlier, they're concerned about his age. More progressive, younger Democrats are not happy with him about his stance on or how he's been handling Israel and Hamas, that whole deal. So, yeah, I do think he will be the nominee. I think we'll just see many Democrats this November when they vote. They'll be voting more against Trump than they will be for Biden.
But I think the same thing could be said for a lot of Republicans. It's not so much that I'll include myself in this. I'm not so much a fan of Trump as I absolutely cannot abide the thought of casting a vote for the current administration.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true when you look at polling. I mean, most Republicans, or at least a majority, are happy with Trump as the nominee, but there is a portion that is not, and really is just going to be voting against Biden in November.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if we just put way too much emphasis on the whole presidential race. But then again, I look at some of the damage done in the last 4 years, and or the last 3 years anyway, and I think Well, maybe it's attention that needs to be there. Trump's legal challenges. I know that the mainstream media narrative is, well, he's so tied up in legal challenges he can't even campaign. What's your take on this? Does it hurt him or does it help him, the fact that he is being so vigorously pursued by his opponents?
I think if Trump's taught us anything, is that normal political conventions don't really apply to him. And I feel like with the legal cases, as you've seen in many cases, this really is like a boost for his base, and they quite like this. They see this as a political witch hunt. They see this as a two-tiered justice system, and that Trump is being unfairly targeted. So at the end of it all, I guess it doesn't really matter. It matters what the perception is. So if Republicans think that it's a witch hunt, they're going to think it's a witch hunt, and it's gonna work to his favor. Now how this affects the November election, I couldn't really say. I mean, it could have negative implications, especially if he is, say, I guess, prosecuted to the fullest extent, but
indicted or jailed or something like that.
Yeah.
It seems like Trump has been picking up quite a bit of support, though, among blacks, among Latinos. I'm curious if maybe he has turned a corner. When his mugshot came out, not so long ago, it seems like that actually gave the man street cred.
Yes, this is what he has said. And to actually go to the point about Hispanics, so here in Texas, where I'm from, a polling was just released today about some of the elections going on, and Trump actually has an advantage amongst Hispanic voters in the state than Ted Cruz, who's our U.S. senator, going up against Colin Allred this November. And so you're definitely seeing, especially if you look back at the 2020 election, you saw in South Texas, heavily Hispanic areas, Trump making a lot of gains in those areas, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that continue in November.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, a lot can happen between now and November, and I'm not I don't know how to read tea leaves, so I guess my guess is as good as anybody else's, but it will be very interesting to see who Trump chooses as a running mate, and somebody needs to get your article in his hand so he has some good criteria from which to choose.
Yep. Exactly.
Again, we are talking with Garrit Blizzard. He is a Young Voices contributor as well as a senior at University of Texas at Austin. For people who want to follow your work, tell us where we can find you on social media or where your writing is featured.
Yeah, so of course you can go visit thetexashorn.com, which is where a lot of my writings are. Go check out Inside Sources, which is where this article was posted. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Garrit Blizzard. That's my Twitter handle. So, yeah.
All right. Very good. Jared, it was great to meet you. I look forward to our next conversation. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk a little bit closer to the election. We'll see how the sands have shifted between now and then.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.